Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, the films that shaped the MTV generation. A while back, I looked at 1987's Cherry 2000, a rousing B-movie about one man's expedition across a dangerous post-apocalyptic terrain to find a replacement body for his favorite sex bot. Today's film, 1988's Miracle Mile, was written and directed by Cherry 2000's director, Steve De Jarnatt. These remain the only two feature films De Jarnatt has directed, but really, that's a pretty good 1-2 punch. Miracle Mile is the name for a stretch of Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles between Fairfax and La Brea that features a lot of cool old Art Deco buildings. It's also the location of the La Brea tar pits, the excavation site for the remains of Ice Age animals who were trapped in the tar. I lived in the Miracle Mile neighborhood from 1995 to 2011, and seeing all the familiar landmarks in this film makes me very happy. In Los Angeles, a man named Harry wanders around the tar pits, flirting with a woman named Julie. Julie is played by Mare Winningham, whom we have seen in St. Elmo's Fire, while Harry is played by Anthony Edwards, whom we have seen in both Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Top Gun. It's love at first sight for Harry and Julie. My favorite Miracle Mile trivia fact is that Anthony Edwards and Mare Winningham just got married to each other a couple of months ago, more than 30 years after the release of this film. Miracle Mile's atmospheric and faintly sinister score was composed by German synth pioneers Tangerine Dream, who wrote the scores for Risky Business, Vision Quest, Near Dark, and Legend, all of which I've looked at here. Julie lives in the massive Park La Brea apartment complex with her grandmother Lucy, played by Lou Hancock. Her grandfather Ivan lives in Park La Brea as well, but in a different apartment, and Lucy and Ivan haven't spoken to each other for more than 15 years. Ivan is played by John Agar, known for his appearances in films like Sands of Iwo Jima and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and for his marriage to Shirley Temple. Julie is working that evening at Johnny's Coffee Shop. You have no doubt seen Johnny's in many other films like The Big Lebowski and Reservoir Dogs. Johnny's is used quite often as a location for filming because it looks extremely retro and cool, but it hasn't operated as a real restaurant since 2000. These days, it's used solely for filming and for Bernie Sanders' campaign events. Harry and Julie arrange to meet after her shift to go dancing. Harry sets his alarm to wake him in time to meet Julie and takes a nap, but an accidental fire blows out his power and he oversleeps. He reaches the coffee shop at 4 in the morning. A waitress played by Olan Jones gives Harry Julie's phone number. He calls her apartment from the phone booth outside, but Lucy tells him Julie took a Valium and is now sound asleep. The phone rings when Harry hangs it up. He answers the call and finds himself speaking to a distraught young man named Chip, who is trying to reach his father but misdialed. Chip works at a nuclear missile silo in North Dakota. He leaks the information to Harry that the US has ordered a nuclear missile strike, and we have an hour and 10 minutes until the USSR's counterstrike reaches the US. Harry hears a gunshot on the other end of the line, and then someone else takes the phone and orders Harry to forget everything he just heard. A freaked out Harry enters the diner. The diner cook, Fred, is played by Robert Doakey, whom we saw as Sergeant Reed in RoboCop. Early morning patrons include an unnamed man played by Earl Bowen, whom we saw as Dr. Silberman in The Terminator, who is talking to a trans woman played by Danny De La Paz. Also at the diner are a flight attendant played by Diane Delano, a pair of blue-collar workers, and a high-powered businesswoman named Landa. Landa is played by Bing Crosby's granddaughter, Denise Crosby, best known for playing Lieutenant Yar on Star Trek The Next Generation. While waiting for her order, Landa gets to work doing the kinds of things important high-powered 80s businesswomen would do in diners at 4 in the morning, i.e. she's speed-reading the Cliff's Notes of Gravity's Rainbow, which she keeps stored in her briefcase along with her personal computer and her ginormous cordless phone. Harry tells the other diner patrons about his unsettling phone call. Everyone thinks it's probably a prank except for Landa, who uses her ginormous cordless phone to call a senator to ask if the US is at force readiness. She gets confirmation that something very bad seems to be going down. Landa is an expert at disaster readiness. She warns the diner patrons that everything will fall into chaos as soon as word gets out, so they have to get to LAX as quickly as possible to catch a charter flight to Antarctica, which stands the best chance of weathering out a global nuclear war. To make sure the best minds on Earth get safely evacuated, she puts in a bunch of calls to prominent people, including my sister's former astronomy professor, Dr. Carl Sagan. Someone steals Harry's car in the chaos, so Harry hitches a ride in Fred's catering van to get to the airport. Fred refuses to stop at Park La Brea to pick up Julie. Landa tells Harry to get to the helipad on the top of the Mutual Benefit Life building on Wilshire, and she'll arrange for a helicopter to take him and Julie to the airport. Harry jumps from the back of the truck. He flags down a driver named Wilson, and using a gun he took from Fred, fills him in on the situation and orders him to drive him to Park La Brea. Wilson is played by Forrest Gump's Michael T. Williamson, whom we have seen in Streets of Fire. Wilson doesn't have enough gas to make it to LAX, so they stop at a gas station. The manager thinks they seem suspicious and pulls a gun on Wilson, and a pair of police officers stop by to investigate. Wilson has stolen goods in his trunk, so he douses the police officers in gasoline to get them to back off, and when one of the cops fires her gun, she triggers an explosion. Harry and Wilson escape in a stolen police car. At Park La Brea, while Harry runs in to get Julie, Wilson speeds off in the stolen police car. Julie is sound asleep thanks to the Valium, but Harry briefs Lucy on the situation and convinces her of the need to get to the helipad as quickly as possible. Lucy calls her estranged husband, and while Lucy and Ivan reconcile for the first time in 15 years, Harry orders them to get their car and meet them on Wilshire. Julie is still mostly asleep, so Harry puts her in a shopping cart and wheels her through the courtyards of Park La Brea and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Harry and Julie meet back up with Julie's grandparents, but Ivan and Lucy have decided they're not going to get on the helicopter. Instead, they're going to savor their last moments on Earth together by going to Cantor's for a pastrami sandwich. I cannot possibly fault them for this. Cantor's pastrami is god-tier food, and if you're planning your last meal on Earth, you could do a lot worse. Julie and Harry make it to the helipad. One of Landa's associates, a man named Gersted, has finagled a helicopter but no pilot. Gersted is played by character actor Kurt Fuller, perhaps best known for playing the eccentric coroner Woody on Psych. More passengers arrive, including a pair of assault rifle-wielding ladies in black trench coats and stilettos who are billed as Beverly Hills Chick 1 and Beverly Hills Chick 2. Beverly Hills Chick 1 is played by Jeanette Goldstein, best known as Vasquez in Aliens, whom we have seen playing one of the vampires in Near Dark. Harry hits the street in search of a pilot. He finds one lifting weights at the most 80s gym ever. The pilot, who is played by Brian Thompson, agrees to help as long as he can safely evacuate his boyfriend as well. Julie and Harry witness a police car crashing into a department store. The car is driven by Wilson, who has picked up his sister Charlotta. Charlotta dies in the crash, and Wilson succumbs to his injuries soon after. Charlotta is played by Kelly Jo Minter, billed in this as Kelly Minter, who is known for Summer School and A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Here's an odd thing about Kelly Jo Minter. She played a video store clerk in The Lost Boys, in which she appeared in one scene and had no dialogue, and yet she received really great billing in the opening title sequence. Here in Miracle Mile, her character appears on screen only as a corpse, and yet she's billed in the title sequence immediately after Denise Crosby. Title sequence credits are important to Hollywood, and placement in them is hotly negotiated, because it signifies that a performer is important to the film. So either Minter originally played more significant roles in both films that got cut for time, or she had an agent who had superhuman abilities at negotiating amazing billing for small roles. Harry and Julie emerge from the department store and find that the news of imminent destruction has now broken. Wilshire Boulevard, along with the rest of the world, has erupted into chaos and violence. Harry and Julie make it up to the helipad once again, but the helicopter has taken off. Gersted, drunk and raving, has stayed behind watching nuclear missiles streak across the sky. The helicopter returns and picks up Harry and Julie as the sky turns red. Nuclear missiles blaze past the Hollywood sign. The windows of the helicopter explode, the pilot is killed, and the helicopter goes down in the La Brea tar pits. As the helicopter fills with tar, Harry tries to console Julie by telling her that if a direct strike hits them, they might turn into diamonds. The helicopter sinks beneath the surface, and the sky turns white. So yeah, it's a very sweet love story about a whirlwind romance where everyone dies in the end. The screenplay to Miracle Mile was very highly regarded and much buzzed about in Hollywood. Steve De Jarnatt wrote it back in 1983, and it was set to be made at Warner Brothers, which envisioned it as a full-scale blockbuster with a big-name director. Production went into turnaround, and after several years of inactivity, De Jarnatt bought back the rights to his own script so it could be made somewhere else, with himself attached as the director. As much as producers loved the script, they thought it was too depressing, and they pushed for an upbeat ending. De Jarnatt eventually made it himself on a low budget, which enabled him to stay true to his original vision. The film wasn't a hit. It barely made an impact in theaters, but it was well reviewed, and people who've seen it know this is a cool little film. Back when I looked at War Games, I talked about the low-grade terror about nuclear brinkmanship, which was a constant part of life for us Gen Xers. Miracle Mile begins as a sweet romance, and evolves into a terrifying depiction of every Gen Xer's worst-case scenario. One of the script's truest details is the way every character grasps the situation with minimal explanation. When Harry first tells Wilson about looming annihilation, the first words out of Wilson's mouth are, "When does the cloud come?" The pair of Beverly Hills chicks casually mentions that the LA basin is a total overkill center, meaning that they know a great many Soviet missiles are going to come down right on Los Angeles. That's a pretty accurate depiction of the way we all internalized a whole lot of information about the constant nuclear threat. Growing up in Spokane in the early 80s, I had friends whose parents made sure their kids knew that the plan was to drive to the nearby Fairchild Air Force Base if the missiles launched, because that was a known Soviet target, and we all knew that in the event of a nuclear war, it's far preferable to die in the first strike. The threat of nuclear war was a part of daily life, and Miracle Mile reflects that bizarre aspect of growing up in the 80s remarkably well. While Landa rallies to get everyone to LAX, the trans woman decides to stay behind in the coffee shop and drink her coffee because she knows survival is a long shot. Ditto for Julie's grandparents, who have reached the same conclusion. Producer complaints aside, Miracle Mile needed that incredibly downbeat climax, because if there's one thing we all knew in the 80s, it's that once the missiles are launched, no one gets a happy ending. Next time, I'm looking at the 1985 UK cyberpunk made-for-TV movie that launched a deeply weird and chaotic 1980s pop culture icon, Max Headroom. Thank you for hanging in there with me on these last few episodes of the series, and I hope I'll see you then.